Greetings, everyone. In this week's Future Trends Forum, we explore the idea of redesigning a college and university to be more caring to its students, to its faculty, and staff. What is involved in that kind of redesign and rethink? What does caring mean in this situation? We're delighted to be joined by Kevin McClure, author of a new book on this subject. I think you'll find the conversation very thoughtful and wide ranging. I hope you enjoy. As always, please leave comments, and of course, as they say, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me welcome everybody. Welcome to the Future Trends Forum. I'm delighted to see you here today. We have a terrific guest who has written a very powerful book. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Let me introduce this week's guest. Professor McClure has authored a very, very powerful book on how we can actually redesign universities to be caring. And when I was reading the book, I was thinking it reminded me of the lessons I thought we had learned during the COVID pandemic, that it was extra important for colleges and universities to really pay careful attention to the well-being of students, as well as to faculty and staff. I'm not sure if we learned that lesson, but Professor McClure is here to teach it to us again, if necessary, and with his own particular spin on things. Professor McClure, greetings. Where are you today? Where have we found you?
Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here as part of this conversation. I am joining from Wilmington, North Carolina, on the far eastern tip of North Carolina. We have a beautiful, beautiful fall day here.
Oh my gosh, on the eastern tip. You must get the occasional storm.
We do get the occasional storm. We have been on a bit of a hot streak, or I don't know what you call the opposite of a hot streak, but we've had multiple years now where we have not been affected by a storm. And of course, living in this area, what that means is now we just assume that at any moment we should be prepared because we've had a string of good luck.
And always be careful with that. Well, I'm really glad you could join us. And friends, if you're new to the forum, I'm going to put to Professor McClure a couple of questions to get the ball rolling. But then it's going to be over to you for your questions and comments. So please, if you had a chance to read his new book, please be ready with questions. But if you haven't had, think about what it means to reorganize and redesign a university in terms of the standard of care. And think about as well his answers to my questions. So the first one I wanted to ask you is, when I talk to audiences about trying to provide a better experience for students and trying to support students through difficult times of multiple ways, and we've had many sessions on this, everything from food insecurity, student homelessness, to adult learners who are trying to juggle multiple family responsibilities and jobs as well as study. I sometimes get pushback, and some of the pushback occurs in the form of rigor. I don't want to be too nice to my students because they'll become soft and they won't succeed. Or I want to keep a standard of academic excellence up, and that goes against a standard of care. How do you respond to these kind of charges? How do you to these arguments? How do you anticipate them, and how do you take care of them?
Yeah, I think there's something of a false tension that sometimes gets assumed there, where we think that care means the absence of accountability or the absence of standards, or we associate care with the absence of excellence.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I don't find that is true. So, throughout the interviews that I did, actually, one of the recurring things I heard from staff and faculty was a real desire for us to live up to our standards and a feeling that we actually hadn't done that. Um, Now, of course, what people really want is in the application of our standards, if we're going to pursue this idea of accountability for one another, that we're doing so fairly and with transparency. And so it's not just blanket accountability, but it is, I think a higher order or a well executed type of accountability. But anyone that's been in a caregiver role has an understanding of the fact that caregiving isn't just about being nice all the time. We have a responsibility to the people that we're caring for, and sometimes that responsibility includes holding them accountable, calling them
Hmm.
out, helping
Hmm.
them understand, why there might be a particular restriction or rule in place, and why we're attempting to, live up to those standards that we've set for ourselves. Um, and then on that notion of of excellence, what's interesting is a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about in this book that for me, I'm kind of putting under this category of a caring university is the stuff of good organizations. It
Hmm.
is the type
Hmm.
of processes that we would hope for in an organization that is well run and therefore I think performs better. And so um, there is, in my mind, actually a very clear route to excellence through the types of changes that I'm advocating, which is to say, it's not the case that we achieve excellence by squeezing people. We achieve excellence, I think, by setting the type of cultural and structural conditions that really kind of unlock the talent that we have here. And so that's something of the irony I think at play in higher education right now for me is that we are still pursuing excellence. We still have these grand aspirations. We're doing it in a way that I think is negligent towards some of the people on our campuses. And that equation doesn't work. Or you do reach a real limit in terms of what you can expect in terms of return. And we are not necessarily living up to our full potential because we're not doing enough to be attentive to the well-being of people. And through some adjustments, through some organizational changes, I think we could improve.
Well, thank you for that very wise and balanced answer. I will copy it and steal it and use it from now on because I get this kind of pushback sometimes. Um, uh, you mentioned organizational changes, and you mentioned as well, what makes an organization good and effective. I'm curious, in the peculiar institution of colleges and universities, what are some of the organizational changes we can make in order to be more caring and more supportive for our populations?
All right, so I'm not going to go into like excruciating detail on all of these because this is basically the heart and soul of the book. But there are six organizational changes that I think are really important. They're not like the only organizational changes that I think would matter or make a difference, but there's six that for me speak to the nature of the problems that I felt have really given rise to some of the outcomes that we're seeing now in the form of resignation, disengagement, forms of resistance. Those types of problems in the higher education workplace are ones that I locate at the level of the institution, which is to say they are a certain type of problem that we have some agency, some level of control in. There are other problems that we're experiencing now that I think we are not producing ourselves. They're being foisted upon us, they're being forced on us. Those are problems too, and those are problems that we can contend with. But the six changes that I was thinking about are ones that I feel like we have some capacity within our institutions to be able to move on. So, one of them, for example, is around the idea of campus strategy. We have a tendency to create goals and aspirations as institutions. We develop strategic priorities, and we do it in a way that doesn't really take into account our labor capacity.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so what it means is occasionally we set goals for ourselves that aren't achievable. We set goals for ourselves that stretch people really thin. We don't think about what offices need to be staffed up. We may not think about which offices don't have the right mix of personnel in order to pull off what we're setting out to do. And there are some real basic questions about the employee experience that we just can't answer because we're not collecting any data on it. And so that type of organizational change basically calls on us to say we ought to have a true talent management strategy at the same time that we have a broader institutional strategy.
Hmm. Hmm.
And although that may sound a little strange to us in higher education, this is not a new idea. This is something that has been advocated for a very long time in other sectors, and it's premised on the idea that we do have talent on our campuses, and we're going to need to do more in order to develop that talent, to keep people, and to make sure that we have the right mix of people in the right places in order to move forward with the goals that we set. Um, a second example of the type of organizational change that I advocate focuses on employee rights and voice. And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
we still have significant issues with it. Well, let me first acknowledge that on the bright side, we are probably the most democratic workplace in America by virtue of, particularly at public institutions, the way that at least some Supreme Court precedent has enabled the existence of constitutional rights on campuses by virtue of our tradition of shared governance. Um,
Mhm.
we enable employee voice much better than many places, and so that is a good thing. That's something that I think is a real strength that we ought to leverage. Um, Unfortunately, we're moving in the other direction and we're eroding that rather than seeing it as a real space where we could continue to attract people and could be a real source of vitality. So that chapter and that organizational change focuses on ensuring that we aren't treating people like second-class citizens, such as our part-time faculty, contingent faculty. It talks about the importance of ensuring that our shared governance structures are inclusive of people beyond tenure track faculty on campuses. Um, it talks about how shared governance is a practice. And as a practice, we can do it well or we can do it really poorly. There are campuses that do it well and campuses that do it poorly. And we need to train people in this practice, both faculty, staff, and administrators to do it well. We can't just assume collaborative shared governance will happen. We have to make it happen. Um, so that's a second example. There are multiple that I'm happy to go into. Four more that I'm happy to go into, but those are the types of changes that I have in mind, and they're ones in which we will have to kind of act collectively. We can't expect that a heroic figure is going to kind of swoop in and fix all of these things. And so it is, in many cases, kind of a collective action problem and a collective action
Mhm.
opportunity.
Mhm. Mhm. I have so many thoughts. I mean, one is how can we do this, especially when academia has a hard time with collective action, and a lot of campuses are facing financial pressures, and on top of this, we're facing just horrendous, extraordinary levels of political pressures. It seems like, in a sense, and please don't take this the wrong way, you're asking campuses that are already laboring under these massive weights well, here's one more thing you need to do. How can we do this at this time?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I think in some cases we're doing the wrong things on campuses. Where the things that granted, I'm biased, but I think that we should be pouring into and investing more in these types of things because they'll be good for our people, good for our organizations, good for our students. We still got campuses that are playing prestige games. We still got campuses that are heavily invested in competition with one another for scarce resources. And so we're still spending a lot of time, energy, resources on stuff that I think, frankly, doesn't matter very much. And is in some cases contributing to the problems that we have. So one answer to the question of how do we do this when it feels like it's just one more thing is that I think we have to stop doing the wrong things and do obviously what I think are the right things. The other piece of this, though, is yes, it feels very big, and I think I saw at one point that my friend Karen Costa is joining us here. She's given me some advice on
Oh,
this myself in the face of some of these big problems, big challenges, things like that you're interested in, Brian, like climate change, which feels like an enormous thing.
it
Um,
did.
there are still ways in which we can show up and take part in this. We can identify our own individual zones of action. We can figure out how we join up with people that are similarly interested in our zones of action and work together to make steps. So there is no final destination with this. There is no Caring University badge that you can purchase once you've arrived at some points. This is something that is going to be ongoing work that we chip away at. There are offices that kind of already do this, right? They, for example, might be a faculty development unit. Every year they come together and they say, this is the challenge that we're facing this year, or the challenge is we're going to start doing X, Y, and Z to chip away at this. And step by step, they try to make progress on these things. And the same thing is true for what I'm calling for here. It's not going to happen like a tsunami where all of a sudden we wake up one day and we've achieved these things. It's going to be through partnership and collaboration where people come together, show up, identify a problem, and think about how we can take one step towards fixing it. And so, kind of what I've set out for here is some pathways that institutions might consider, or people at institutions might consider, but also just kind of calling out the possibility that these aspirations are things that are attainable. A lot of the cases in the book are not invented out of thin air. These are real places that have tried these things. And so it is hopefully an invitation to that space of possibility where we say we don't have to continue to operate our institutions this way. There is a different way that we could approach it.
Well, I appreciate that very, very calm and reasonable response to my intemperate, flailing question. And I appreciate the practicality of it, as well as the kindness involved in it.
I
Uh,
do want to say one, Brian, you asked a good question about kind of the context that we're in. I wrote this book in a different context.
ah,
And it's one that obviously we were entering into, one that I could kind of see as I was writing, but I don't know that I even at the point of writing the book had a sense of the scale and nature of the types of problems that we would be talking about today in higher education. Um, and as a consequence of that, there are things that I'm calling for in this book that are much harder now than they were even as I was writing it. And they were hard even as I was writing it. And so I do want to acknowledge that there are some changes that make some of the things I call for in the book feel almost impossible. I don't think that that means that those are bad ideas. I don't think that it means that those are things that we should not be aiming for as institutions. If anything, it's an indictment of the context, that the context is what we need to fix. The political environment is what needs to change, and not necessarily that some of these ideas or goals in and of themselves are ones that we ought to kind of completely abandon.
No, I appreciate that. Friends, I've got a couple more questions. I've got a dozen more questions I'd like to ask. But this is the time for all of you to contribute your thoughts and your questions. So please feel free to grab the Q&A box and start typing in your Q so we can prepare an A. But also feel free to use the chat box. And we've already had a few comments. So our mutual friend and editor, Great Britain, says it may say less about higher education than about how undemocratic most workplaces really are, which is very, very true. And our mutual.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that higher ed has necessarily achieved some sort of like super high bar, right?
No, I got it.
Yeah, but I do think it's okay for us to mention and to celebrate things that are good about working in higher education and that we get right. The risk, of course, is by calling out things as being broken all the time, as it makes it possible for them to be kind of further jettisoned or eroded. The democratic nature of our institutions is not one of those things. And so, as I said, I really think of this as a strength that we need to be leveraging and celebrating as something that is unique about both our workplaces and part of what can make our institutions function even better.
True. Another mutual friend of ours, Karen Costa, observed when you were talking about the question of resistance to care, and she said that I would assume that some of the resistance to care is tied into how care is so gendered in our culture.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it's been interesting to observe some of the ways in which just even the notion of a caring university has been received across higher education, the different populations in higher education. And there are certain populations that I think more naturally gravitate towards this, and some that maybe bristle at it a bit. Now, part of that, I think, is yes, kind of gendered assumptions about caring and care work. Some of it is around what I think are kind of misguided understandings of the purpose of higher education. And also this kind of conflation of care and niceness. And for me, that's not really what this is about. I mean, I'm all for being a nice person as much as possible, but in a lot of ways, when we're talking about caregiving, anyone who has been a caregiver themselves, it is about work. It is about action. And that's really what I'm calling for here. It's not kind of a universal appeal to kindness or niceness. Again, not with any opposition to those, but rather it's a call towards action and to say, we assume a special responsibility as institutions when we hire people. It doesn't mean that our responsibility is to meet all of their needs, or it does not mean our responsibility is to make them happy all the time, but it does mean that we have some responsibility. And I think that we have for a long time operated with a very low standard for that. And I would like to see us elevate it, because I think that's what will help us to kind of navigate the situation that we're in now, and can lead to a more prosperous future for everybody that works in higher ed.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I think that that overarching goal of making the whole situation better for everyone is really um, one that we should be heeding. Uh, we have questions that are coming in, and there's one from Suzanne Buglioni, who says, "What about belonging among employees, and how do the organizational challenges, like lack of care, impact our ability to care for students?" So I guess those are two different questions. They're both really good. So the first is, what about belonging among employees? I'm inferring, Suzanne, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're thinking that while we do, or starting to do a better job of trying to foster a sense of belonging among our students, how do we do the same for belonging among faculty and staff?
Exactly. Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah,
good question.
it is a great question. What's been interesting about this work is so many of the central ideas that we have established around the kind of necessary conditions for students to be successful have a corollary in the conditions that are necessary for employees to be successful, because ultimately what we're talking about are things that humans need, and belonging, I think, is one of them. So this notion of it's good for students to have a sense of belonging, it's good for students to get involved and to feel engaged. I think all of those are true for employees. They may show up a little bit differently, right? Just to be clear. um, Employees, I think, maybe have a different desire for belonging, and I think in some
Mm.
cases that manifests as, I do want to feel like I am valued here, that my ideas are taken seriously, um, that I have kind of that core sense of safety to participate in consequential conversations, um, and that there are people around me, colleagues who know me and will show up for me in various ways when I have a need. Um, and and so some of that is also an encouragement to us as colleagues and culture builders at our institutions, to think about, who are we when we show up to work, what kind of colleagues are we to the people around us. But yeah, there is certainly a desire among people that I've talked to for belonging. Not everybody, though, that I've talked to necessarily needs the workplace to provide for them, you know, their entire social community. And so we also can recognize that how we provide those types of opportunities for employees could look different than for students, and that there are going to be some people who are like, I'm good. I'm happy to show up, do my work. I don't need to have work besties, and it will be okay. And for us to be respectful of that type of boundary.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a very wise answer. I can see why campuses would want to bring you to work with them. And Suzanne, thank you for that really thoughtful question. Only 5 words, and it really provokes a lot. But Suzanne continued to say, "How do organizational challenges, and as an example, she gives lack of care, impact our ability to care for students? In this case, I'm assuming, is faculty and staff." And there was a follow-up question. Karen Costa, well, an observation. Karen Costa says, "Faculty staff working conditions are student learning conditions." So I'm reading that as part of it. But what do you think? How do these organizational challenges get in the way of this kind of work of care?
Yeah, so there are kind of multiple dimensions of this, and Karen, I think, captured very nicely one dimension of this, which is some of what we're talking about is at the level of the institution, about our culture, our norms, and our values, and some of our structures, some of our policies, that type of stuff, very much sets the conditions for how everybody on campus experiences this place, whether it's
Mm,
faculty, staff, student
mm,
employees, graduate students.
mm.
And so if the norm of this place is that, we are competing, striving for excellence, striving for rankings all the time, that type of value system permeates everything and has a way of kind of establishing some of the baseline expectations for everybody that operates there. And that affects everybody. And that's part of the reason why there's good reason for us in some cases to get rid of divisions that we create between faculty, staff, graduate students, students, because we are our experiences of this place are so intertwined that those types of categories don't serve us well all the time. There is also the dimension of this that's just interrelational, which is it is not coincidental that I have always, always done my best teaching and my best advising with students when my workload has been the most reasonable. When I am stretched, when I am
Yeah,
stressed,
yeah.
when I'm in endless meetings, when there is toxicity in those meetings, when I am trying to navigate poor policy choices on the part of my institution, or those things then trickle into my email responses. They might trickle into, as much as I'd love to prevent that from happening, sometimes that's hard to do. And so the best version of me as an educator has been when, again, that level of stress is dialed down. And so what's interesting is we put so much emphasis these days on, you know, well, I guess this is arguable. I have noticed that I think we're putting more emphasis on teaching quality, and we want students to be successful. It's so interesting how rarely we're talking about labor conditions
Hmm,
as part
hmm,
of that. The expectation is that somehow we will fiddle with every single other knob on campus, technology, uh, course sequencing, registration systems. We're trying every knob, but we're just not really touching the workload knob. Um, and I think that if we were more willing to engage with that seriously, we may find that there are some real positive downstream effects for quality of instruction, quality of advising, quality of mentoring, and then the types of outcomes that we want to see from students.
I'm curious about that point, and thank you for the excellent answer. Again, thank you for the really good questions. Um, what should we be doing less of if we're going to be, trying to make workloads more manageable? What should we step back from?
So again, this is one where there are kind of multiple different dimensions of this, some that are bigger in scale than others. I think we have a lot of what I call work creating traditions in higher education that we could be doing less of. We do a ton of letter writing that a significant chunk of we probably just don't need to be doing in the form of letters of recommendation, nomination letters, um, a lot of work. And so this is an area where people say AI is going to be able to help with this, that we're going to be having AI producing all these letters. That's the real signal to me that we probably don't even need the letters.
Hmm, hmm.
So there are these work creating traditions. If I nominate a faculty member for an award, for example, our tradition is that they go put together a packet that's like 100 pages long to try to, be competitive for this award. That is a cognitive load on that person for a recognition system. It shouldn't work that way. That is a work creating tradition that we have control over that we could certainly fix. So that's a smaller scale dimension of it. Bigger scale dimension of this is perhaps kind of you know a campus like my own that has made a number of different changes with an eye towards the fact that we recently became an R2 university.
Mm,
I was
mm.
perhaps the only person on campus who pointed out that the R2 designation was completely meaningless, by which I meant it obligates us to do nothing. This is not a legal mandate where we have
Oh, oh,
to
oh, oh.
go and do X, Y, and Z. It is a label that got applied to us. We could completely ignore it if we wanted to, but that's not what campuses do. They treat these things as this path that they are obligated to now follow. And so we now have to increase our research expectations. We have to increase the grant money that we have coming in. And it produces more work. It's a choice. I mean, our state legislature is not even encouraging this. They don't care. If anything, what they care about is that we're teaching more.
Right. Right.
And so there are moments where we kind of engage in these institutional aspirations that maybe have some logic institutionally, but they are not good for the people who work here. And there's this conversation around kind of how do we get faculty to do X, Y, and Z, or how do we get staff more involved in this? And part of my answer to that is we need institutional aspirations that actually speak to the stuff that educators care about. And I think there are certainly people who care about maybe some of those things that I mentioned. I think there are a lot of people though who don't. They want to be able to do their version of good work with a set of reasonable expectations. They want to build meaningful relationships with the people around them. They want to make a small difference in their communities. And so there is, I think, an opportunity for us to just call out and dial down some of those institutional aspirations and to bring them into closer alignment with the realities of people who work here.
Mm, mm. I wonder. I have so many thoughts, and they often take. Well, they might take us away from this conversation. I mean, this might be one positive way of addressing my peak higher education idea.
Mm.
But let me focus more on what people are asking here. Our mutual friend Karen Costa asks this question, which is a really good one. I've been thinking about this a bit. She says, I worked at an institution that had the motto "students first," and it always frustrated me because I think we need cultures of care that take care of students, faculty, staff, and yes, even executive leaders. Our success is interdependent. I'm curious your thoughts on this type of approach, which is still pretty common.
Yes, I similarly am not a fan of the student first approach, and nor would I be comfortable with a faculty first approach. I'm not sure that it helps us all that much to be kind of prioritizing things in that way. There is an argument that one could make that the student success movement, while being incredibly important in producing a number of very effective innovations, has also had one byproduct that is to effectively shift all institutional attention towards students and away from the well-being of staff and faculty.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it kind of establishes that hierarchy of prioritization that enables an institution to say, we are going to do X, Y, and Z because it's what students need, even at the risk of putting our employees at risk. And so we saw some of that at play during the pandemic, where there were people, real people in real positions on college campuses that were put in harm's way. And there, again, may have been an institutional logic to that. There was certainly a logic around trying to serve our students, protect our students, ensure their welfare. But there were real consequences for employees. And one response to that is that they could have just quit. But I don't know that, that is a long-term sustainable answer in the face of that type of challenge to say,
Oh,
if you're not comfortable with the cost of putting your life at risk, you could always just quit and then we'll find someone else to put their life at risk.
yeah,
It
yeah.
may be the case that we need to kind of recalibrate that idea. This also comes into play, by the way, with faculty staff dichotomy. You know, we have incredibly unequal college campuses between staff and faculty.
Hmm.
Um, some of the resources and privileges that are assigned to faculty but not, given to staff, in my mind, are illogical. Um, they are based purely on notions of status between those two groups. And I don't think, again, that it serves us particularly well. Yes, there are differences between what faculty do, what staff do in some cases, but there are also moments where, like, we are all educators. We are all doing important work. Many folks on campus at this point are highly trained. Many folks on campus have their own domains of expertise. Many people on campus are integral for this campus to be able to do what it does day in and day out. It doesn't matter if you're faculty or staff. And so I think that there's an opportunity for us, particularly on the faculty side, to start feeling more comfortable understanding this as a single community, understanding all of us as employees with intertwined relationships and experiences rather than kind of holding up that status hierarchy.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, I think that's really, really balanced. Uh, Karen, as always, you ask really, really great questions that cut across quite a few different issues, and I think that wasn't easy to do and to handle as a balance, but you did that really, really well. Thank you, Karen. If you're new to the forum, friends, this is the way we work. We have brilliant people who put forward great questions and observations, and our guests, think hard about them and bat them back at you. This is how we progress. We have a precise question from Jess Cook, who wants to know about HR. What's the role of human resources at a caring university? She goes on to add, many of us understand that HR essentially operates to protect the institution, for better or for worse.
Yeah, that's because higher ed ruined HR. And here's why. We we chose to turn HR into basically a kind of job functional type space where its primary purview is, you know, creating the position, posting the position, approving the position, benefits administration, the real kind of nuts and bolts of employment. And we kind of sapped it of the humanness. Um,
Hmm.
if you look at when an institution is experiencing budget cuts where they often turn first to cut, it's almost always in kind of learning development, talent management spaces and HR. And
Hmm.
so we cut
Hmm.
those offices routinely. We don't build them back up. We don't invest in them. And so we treat them as this kind of transactional office. And one of their sole and biggest responsibilities become kind of conflict management. So it's no question, or it's only a matter of time before people get mad at HR because they're the ones that are tasked with conflict resolution and or they're understaffed trying to get jobs posted and people always find that they're too slow or holding things up.
No.
um, and so there is an important role for HR in this work. We have to be more comfortable with investing in HR as a functional space. We have to be willing to understand that HR is its own area of expertise and that there are people who are trained in this and to empower them to be part of those conversations. HR is often not a cabinet level, the chief human resource officer is often not a cabinet level position where they have a seat at the table for consequential decisions. That needs to change, I think. Um, and and so I think that will help so that people don't feel like HR is like the enemy or HR is just there to protect the interests of the institution. I think that's a simplification. Um, some of the ways that institutions have navigated this, by the way, that's kind of maybe not creative, but it is an approach, is they have spun off some parts of HR and some people who work in HR, rebranded it essentially, um, so that people don't as routinely associate it as the enemy or the place where you just go if you're in trouble. And instead, those people who do have real expertise in learning and development, talent management, they can do that work. They can help the organization without maybe some of the perceptive baggage around HR. But yeah, HR is really important. We need to better invest in it. The problem with HR, I think, is that we have starved it and cut it and treated the folks who work there poorly. Um, and um, and and as is true with many spaces on campus, um, there are still opportunities for, us to continue to develop the folks that work there and try to bring in new people, because those are spaces that, by virtue of that neglect, I think could have also gotten a little bit stuck in their own ways.
Understood. You've clearly thought very, very deeply about this as part of your work in organizational theory, and I can infer that you were thinking of examples from non-educational institutions as well as our organizations. We had
Yeah, I mean, I mean, not that we need to necessarily be looking to the corporate sector as like the exemplar that we should be following, but the level of investment that we put in HR by comparison to a similarly sized organization in the private sector, I mean, it is just astronomically lower. Um, and so, you know, we I think, as I said, have not taken seriously this notion of talent management and that being a prerogative of our institution and being able to, whether we're the moment that we're in and what could come in the future. And so there are examples elsewhere that we could point to that suggest a different way.
Okay. All right. That makes a lot of sense. We had a couple of reactions in the chat as during your remarks. Suzanne Buglione mentioned that HR is great when there's a champion there, but if not, nothing. And then she asks, what's the role of the leader that HR reports up to? What's the vision? And I should ask that. In most campuses that you worked with, to whom does HR usually report to?
So it can vary. It's not unusual for them to report to someone that kind of oversees administration and finance. Um, so they kind of live uneasily in this space that might include, facilities management. It might include, the kind of finance registrar kind of components of an institution. And so they might then report up the chain that way. There are some places where the CHRO does report to the president, for example, and have a seat at the cabinet, but that's not a guaranteed thing.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for the comment and for that quick on the fly response. Um, so we're picking this apart and we're finding many different levers that we can pull. And friends, we also have about 13 minutes left. So this is a great time to put in your questions and your comments before we run completely out of time. I, in the chat, mentioned something very small and people have responded very well to it. I was wondering, you described a lot of ways that a bricks and mortar institution could work. And I'm curious about how an online institution would play out differently. And so Eileen Frank mentioned that at her online institution, they do a lot. She says, let me get this right. Our current program administrator provides timely information, answers questions in a timely manner, takes an interest in making sure her faculty are okay, and takes an interest in making sure the students in the program are okay. Caring is there, which is a really nice thing to hear about. I'm curious, in what you're describing, what are the particular differences for an online institution? Either a completely online institution, like say Western Governors University, or a mostly online institution, like say something New Hampshire University.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that I have a great answer to that. There might be some people on here who have more expertise or perspective on that than I do, just because I don't think in the data that I've collected or the questions that I've been pursuing, there has likely been enough perspective from folks that are at institutions like that. What I will say is that I do notice some differences across institution type in some of their approach to this, the way that they have changed or innovated over time, and just generally how they think about kind of employees, good or bad. So, um, without throwing anyone under the bus per se, I think a big research university, flagship university, although it has in some cases the most resources collectively that they might be able to put to some of these questions, struggles the most because in some cases it's boxed in by its own sense of tradition. And so that truncates or restricts their ability to move in certain cases because they are answering to legislators who weirdly care really a great deal about what they're doing. They've got a donor group that cares about what they're doing, an alumni that cares, very deeply about what they're doing. And the decentralization means that you've got pockets that are sometimes rowing in lots of different directions. And it can be a little bit hard to achieve a type of cohesion where an institution might be able to move in the same direction. And so some of the more interesting change I've seen, in not exclusively, but some of it has been at campuses that are a little bit smaller, maybe a little bit easier to manage by virtue of that, a little bit less tied up by tradition. And so therefore has a little bit more room to maneuver. So I guess if I were to extrapolate from that, the question that I might ask is if it's possible for an online university, for example, to not feel as bogged down by tradition, to be able to kind of operate without feeling like you have to kind of speak to all those same constituent groups in the same way. It's possible potentially by virtue of how they're managed for them to kind of row in the same direction. On the other hand, it is also possible for some of those institutions to be run in a way that could be less democratic, could not be as strong on employee rights, and in some cases to establish working conditions that are not ideal in all instances. And so, there is, I guess, in this work, I have not yet found an institution type that has kind of nailed it. And they all have kind of some unique challenges. Even some of those smaller ones that I mentioned that are innovating, some of them are so cash strapped that there's just some limits to what they can do. So that's less of an answer, probably more perspective, just based on some of my own limited knowledge.
That sense of history and relative lack of it is, I think, a really handy one.
I mean, my institution has no football team. I think that this is great, because that's just one less potential drain on resources. You take another campus that similarly, they may not have the same kind of physical footprint. They may not have a football team. Those things maybe free up your ability to focus on other stuff. And I don't know that that's a terrible thing.
Well, that's been an argument about sports since the beginning, I think. But that is one way of going. We have another question from Mark Lentini, who says, Kevin, you mentioned the role of faculty development units. Could you expand on that, please? And more importantly, how does that scale to the whole institution?
Yeah, so I was just in a conversation with someone earlier today about the notion of faculty development as ironically something that is still under invested in higher education. Yet we've probably seen an enormous amount of progress in the last couple of decades, a greater maturation and sophistication around the notion that faculty need development, how faculty development should be, and this is in the words of the person that I was speaking with, should be a little more strategic, not just kind of ad hoc programs, but really built into the overall strategy of the institution. But part of the reason why I say it's ironic is that we've seen that maturation and sophistication and more strategic kind of orientation to it. And at the same time, there's research that I've seen showing that, on average, an institution might have one faculty developer. Something like only 25% of institutions even have like a Center for Teaching Excellence.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And so even if we've maybe seen some evolution that's in a positive direction, there's still it's still kind of limited in terms of maybe what we would like to see. And so, in terms of scaling that across the organization, across the institution, what I might offer is this. We have only recently, maybe somewhat begrudgingly, come around to the idea that we have a role to play as institutions in developing our people, whether that's leaders, whether it's faculty, whether it's staff. And so we're still, I think, in very early stages of that being institutionalized. which means,
Yeah.
generally speaking, still programs that are not fully funded, not enough personnel, programs that are still kind of restricted to certain people, and largely still rely on outsourcing development to other organizations. And so I would love to see more investment in development broadly across all categories, inclusive of faculty development, and just a way that we might orient faculty at the point of hire, bringing into a culture where development is a thing, where you are not ready to go the moment that you're hired here just because you have a PhD. You're credentialed, but you are now entering a space where the expectation is that we're going to think about our teaching, we're going to think about getting better all the time. That's not going to be a weird thing. It's not going to be a twist your arm thing. It's a thing that we do. And then similarly, kind of build out a suite of opportunities for other people that are working on campus. Think really about what good leadership development looks like and be willing to operate or establish that. So there's this notion of kind of deliberately developmental organizations that I think take the learning and development of adults really seriously. There's a book about that called what's it called? Becoming a People Culture, I think, and it's about deliberately developmental organizations. I use that concept in the book as kind of a springboard to think about, should we not, as colleges and universities, be deliberately developmental with all of our people? And furthermore, we probably should be like the world leader in providing educational developmental opportunities for people, because that's literally what we're all about. This is what we do as a university. We should be like the very best at this that other organizations look to for guidance on how to do this.
Well, that would be great. Well, friends, that gives me a window for my question that I'd like to ask at the very end here, which is I'm trying to imagine what a college would look like, or a university, if we have the McClure model in place, that it is one that dedicates itself to a culture of caring for students, for faculty and staff. And I'm curious what that might look like, say, in 8 years of work, or 10 years of work. How might we distinguish such an institution from its peers who don't follow the McClure model?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, I would like to do a little bit more work on that myself, because I do think there's kind of maybe a next stage of this that could move in that direction. But there are a couple of things that kind of come to mind. So first of all, at an institution like that, we're maybe less likely to see the types of organizational problems that I identify through the book. So things like lack of career ladders for people, things like clear gender and racial inequities in pay, things like, lower reported stress levels, or in this case, yes, lower reported stress levels, people reporting that they feel like their workload is manageable, being able to point towards opportunities for professional growth, being able to feel like they have a voice in consequential decisions, that they have rights that are respected as employees. And so, I hate to say that you'd be able to identify things by the absence of problems, but I think that's one possible way that we could flag some of this, is that heard about a lot in the data collection, that we see a lot still showing up in surveys, that really ignited the Great Resignation in higher ed. We would see improvement or the absence of some of those problems. But I do think that there's probably also some more positive ways that we might be able to look to. Here's my big thing, though. As I said, there's no destination with this, I think. What I'm really interested in,
badge, no box to tick.
no badge, but I'm really interested in places that are trying things. And we just don't have very many institutions that are trying things. Well, okay, that's not fair. We have institutions that are trying things. Typically, it's small pockets of innovation. had see some institutions take bigger swings.
I agree. This is what I found in my work with the Paradigm Project. Is we found lots of little pockets of this kind of movement. Well, that's a very teasing idea. We have to imagine, the presence of an absence. But I think what you described is happier people. People feel more satisfied, and they seem healthier, not just mentally, but also possibly physically.
For sure.
Kevin, that's a great note to end on, and I'm only ending with regret because this is the top of the hour again. You've been fantastic. You've inspired me and so many of us to really transform colleges and universities in such a caring way. What's the best way for people to keep up with you and to find out more about your work on this?
LinkedIn, post a bunch on LinkedIn. And for those that find LinkedIn more cringy, I'm also occasionally on Blue Sky, which also has its own cringy moments. And then you can find me at drkevinrmcclure.com, where I try to update some of the work that I'm doing as well.
Very nice. Well, thank you. Thank you for spending an hour of your time with us. This has been terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you all so much for joining and asking really good questions. And thank you, Brian, for willing to have me on your awesome forum.
This is awesome because of the people here who are splendid. Thank you, everybody. But don't go just yet. Just to remind you that we are in November, but we have events scheduled out. In fact, here, let me share this in the chat. We now have sessions scheduled out through the end of February. So if you'd like to sign up or spread the word, and of course, if you have any guests you'd like to recommend for us, please reach out to me. Thank you again for a great conversation, everybody. I hope everybody is well. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, I hope you're staying as warm and comfortable as you can be. I hope above all that you are all safe and sound. Until then, we'll see you next time online. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.